Okay, welcome to the second screencast in Mrs. Rycroft's series of 3 Woot, about a poem called Adelstrop by poet Edward Thomas. Now this is a poem from the Time and Place Collection C from the EDEXCEL 1 to 9 Anthology. So if you're in Year 10 in January 2016, this is for you. Okay, let's get on and see what I've got to talk to you about today. So, a little bit of context for you. The poem is written about an incident that happened on the 24th of June in 1914. That's about 6 weeks before the outbreak of World War I. So while the country is still quite peaceful and untouched by the ravages of World War I, remember that was called the Great War, and the war to end all wars, and 1 in 5 young men who went away did not come back. So the country was hit very hard by that. But these are the halcyon days before all of that happened. So the poet himself is sitting on the Oxford to Worcester express train, and the train stops unexpectedly at a little village station called Adelstrop. There, no one gets on, no one gets off. And actually the place is so insignificant that there isn't actually a railway station there anymore. It was closed in 1966 when the railways were revamped. The poem, however, is inscribed on a bench which can be found in that place where Adelstrop station once was. So if you ever went there to visit, and if you went to look for it, you certainly could see it. Any searches online for Adelstrop, the poem, or Adelstrop station will show you exactly what you need to know. Now, the poem itself. So, as with my other screencasts, I've posed you a few questions in the little peachy coloured boxes, and hopefully as I talk through each stanza you'll get the answers coming through nice and clearly to you. So the first stanza, let's read it. Yes, I remember Adelstrop, the name, because one afternoon of heat the express train drew up there unwontedly. It was late June. So a couple of things. First of all, it drops you right into the middle of the conversation. He's just been asked a question and he's responding to that question. And then we've got this quite fast run-on line thinking about how very little punctuation, the name, because one afternoon of heat the express train drew up there unwontedly. It was late June. It's almost like we're getting the pace of the train as it slows down. Late June helping us, of course, to connect it to the 24th of June when we know that it was written, and that short statement at the end of the final line there kind of brings you to a stop, pretty much like the train itself. And notice the rhyme scheme. So the first and third lines don't particularly rhyme, but the second and fourth do. So let's move on to the next line. So, enjambment and caesura. That first line should be one line of poetry. I've made the words big on the screen so you can see them. So we've got the steam hissed, someone cleared his throat. Now the train is completely stopped. Can you imagine how irritating it would be to be on that train making an unscheduled stop with no explanation, and you hear the train power down almost, so it shushes as it powers down. Then he says, no one left and no one came on the bare platform. So we've got repetition of no one on the bare platform. So everybody on the train, all the passengers will be looking out the window. And the repetition there of no one kind of imitates the irritation potentially of the passengers, or their curiosity. Think about the effects of the short statements used there, how it slows everything down. And he looks out the window. And what he saw was Adelstrop, only the name. There's no full stop at the end of this line. It's an interesting thing because we've got lots of punctuation slap bang in the middle of the line. I want you to think about the effects of enjambment and caesura. So that's end stop lines, the run-on lines, and the stops in the middle of the line. How do all those different things, the caesura stopping you in the middle of the line, the enjambment breaking the line over two, or breaking the statement over 2 lines, what the effect of that is to the pace of the poem. Now let's look at the next stanza and see how that connects on. So we've got loads of commas here. The first thing I notice when I look at that stanza is how many commas and how many W's and M's there are there. So, and willows, willow herbs, and grass, and meadowsweet, and haycocks dry, no whit less still and lonely fair than the high cloudlets in the sky. So There's lots of classical meadow flowers there, the willows and the willow herbs and the grasses and meadow sweets and haycocks, loads of things there. So he's describing a fully blooming meadow of wild flowers, something that we don't see very often in today's countryside, but you still see, if you search on YouTube, you'll see lots of pictures of that kind of thing. He says no whit. Now, a whit means a little bit, not one little bit less still. So no stiller than the clouds, and lonely fair, no less beautiful than the high cloudlets in the sky. So lonely fair is an interesting phrase in itself, because it's almost an oxymoron, because fair meaning beautiful, and of course lonely meaning isolated. But each one of those coloured bursts of flowers in the meadow potentially is isolated like a little puff of cloud in the sky. And the cloudlets that he's talking about are tiny little bits of cloud. So if you're thinking about the suffix lets, it usually means a little piece of. So if I'm going to talk about little kind of inlets, for example, little tiny waterways letting you into a bigger river or stream. So think about how all of those things go on. There's a lot of lists and flowers and things here, and he's commenting on what he can see out the window, and he suddenly realises, I can see all this amazing nature outside the window. So we've thought about this stanza, and we've thought about how the list of the meadow plants and how the comparison to the beautiful clear summer warm sky makes him pause for thought, really, and think about how beautiful the English countryside is. So let's look at the next stanza. And for that minute a blackbird sang close by, and round him mistier farther and farther all the birds of Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. Now we move from the natural plants a little way, kind of up the evolutionary chain, to the blackbird. So he's not only noticing the view, but now he's beginning to notice the sounds of the countryside as well. And as he notices one, he begins to notice more and more, almost like a domino effect, birds singing out in the sunshine and out in the countryside. And I think what the pace of the poem is doing here, where it goes close by with commas, and round him mistier and farther all the birds of Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire, we're beginning to hear the pace of the train pick up again as it pulls out of the station. And that's where the poem ends. So the blackbird is singing because generally birds sing as an act of aggression, actually, and a claim to territory, but we consider it a beautiful noise and something that we link with peace and quiet and countryside. So he links that with the countryside and what he's seeing. So he's noticed the plants, and now he hears the birds singing. And as the train picks up and pulls away further and further, he's left with this image. So at this point he's not as inward thinking as he was when the train first stopped and everybody sighed and tut. If you remember, the line says, the steam hissed, someone cleared his throat, no one left and no one came on the bare platform. He's extended his view past that, and now he's thinking about all the lovely nature and all the birds singing in Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. So he's thinking further abroad and further afield as his train journey goes on. And that's that poem. It's a spot of time. So it's an elegy almost to the lost peace of pre-war England, in that it's a celebration of what existed and somewhat of a sad reflection on what's been lost. Much like Wordsworth's Westminster Bridge or Hardy's Where the Picnic Was, this is a snapshot in time. So when you study the other two poems, if you haven't done already, think about how elements of this poem link together with Hardy's view of the cliff above the sea and Wordsworth's view of London asleep before the beating heart of the city. The people have come to life to spoil it. How beautiful it is when it's just peaceful and quiet. So all of these things share that idea of looking at a certain place at just a certain snapshot in time, almost like a photograph laid out in a poem, if you were. So if you really want to go for it, what you need to do is to listen to the poem being read, and there are lots online where you can access this being read by a voice much more engaging and interesting than mine, and visualise this guy coming slowly to a stop at a train station, initially being annoyed that he's stopped, and then noticing the plants, and then the singing of the birds and all the beauty that is around him. And as he pulls away from the station and he continues on his journey, the stopping of the train has not just delayed his journey by a couple of minutes, it's enriched his life. He's remembered that there are things outside of whatever he's making the journey for, and outside of the train carriage. That's really me done. So think again about this poem, read it over. The thing you need to do ready for your exam is to go through it and look at the devices. So look at the repetition, look at the way that rhythm creates pace, and look at the way that the lists of initially the plants, but also the lists of the singing and mistier and farther and distance and all of that, the visual imagery in that final stanza picks up the pace and indicates that the train slows, stops and then goes again. Probably just held up at a signal for a few moments while a line was cleared. Who knows, we never will. But I hope you've enjoyed, or at least found something useful, of my little ramblings about the poem Adelstrop by Edward Thomas. Thank you very much.